Maria Santos thought she had found safety working as a nurse for Dubai's wealthy elite, until Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid discovered her secret, a secret growing inside her, and decided she must marry another man or disappear forever. Maria de la Cruz stepped off the plane into the bright Dubai sun, clutching a small suitcase and a folder of documents that represented her new beginning. At 28, she had spent most of her life working in hospitals across the Philippines, but the low pay and endless hours had worn her down. When she was offered a nursing position in one of Dubai's top private hospitals, she saw it as a chance to change her fate. The city's skyline shimmered with promise, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope. Her first week in Dubai was overwhelming. The heat was intense, the pace was fast, and the hospital was unlike anything she had ever seen. Everything was spotless and modern, from the marble floors to the robotic equipment used in surgery. Maria shared a small apartment with 3 other nurses from her country. They worked different shifts, rarely crossing paths except to exchange brief smiles or notes left on the kitchen counter. Despite the loneliness, Maria was determined to adapt. She sent her first salary home to her parents in Manila, proud that she could finally help them pay their debts. Her reputation as a dedicated and gentle nurse spread quickly. Doctors appreciated her calmness under pressure, and patients often asked for her by name. Yet beneath her composed exterior, she struggled with homesickness. Every night, she sat by the window, looking out at the glittering towers of Dubai, wondering what her future held. She didn't know that her path would soon cross with a man whose wealth and power could change her life forever, but at a cost she could never imagine. For now, she believed she was simply chasing a dream in a city of gold. It was an ordinary afternoon at the hospital when everything changed for Maria. The staff received urgent notice that a member of the royal family was being admitted under strict confidentiality. Security guards lined the corridors, and nurses were instructed to maintain absolute discretion. The name written on the admission sheet made everyone whisper quietly. Sheikh Khalid Al-Mansur, one of Dubai's most influential businessmen and a respected figure known for his wealth, power, and connections that reached far beyond the city's borders. Maria was selected as part of the medical team assigned to his private suite because of her spotless record and professional demeanor. When she first entered the luxurious hospital room, she was struck by its elegance. The curtains were embroidered with gold, and the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne. The sheikh sat on the bed, surrounded by assistants, his expression calm but commanding. Maria focused on her duties, checking his vitals and adjusting his four without saying a word. Her quiet confidence caught his attention. While most people around him trembled or rushed to please him, she remained composed and respectful. It intrigued him more than he cared to admit. Over the next few days, Maria continued to care for him during his recovery. He often watched her as she moved efficiently around the room, rarely meeting his gaze. There was something dignified about her simplicity. No makeup, no jewelry, just a calm grace that seemed out of place in his lavish world. When he was finally discharged, he thanked the hospital staff politely, but his eyes lingered on Maria for a moment longer. That brief glance marked the beginning of something dangerous, though neither of them yet understood the chain of events it would soon unleash. Days turned into weeks after Sheikh Khalid's discharge, and Maria thought she would never see him again. But his presence continued to linger in her thoughts, the authority in his voice, the way people obeyed him without question, and that last look he gave her before leaving. She tried to dismiss it, convincing herself it was just another patient. Then one morning, the hospital administrator called her into the office with an unusual request. Sheikh Khalid had personally requested her assistance for follow-up home visits, claiming he trusted only her medical care. The staff considered it a great honor, but Maria felt uneasy. Still, refusing a request from someone of his stature wasn't an option. The Sheikh's villa was breathtaking, an architectural masterpiece surrounded by tall palm trees and guarded gates. Inside, the atmosphere was silent and intimidating. Maria performed her duties with precision, checking his recovery progress and updating his medical reports. He was polite but distant at first, asking questions about her work and life in the Philippines. She answered cautiously, careful not to reveal much about herself. But his curiosity grew stronger each time she visited. Soon, the hospital began receiving lavish floral arrangements, chocolates, and perfumes addressed to Maria. The gifts arrived anonymously at first, but everyone knew who they were from. She returned them quietly, embarrassed by the attention. Some colleagues teased her, others warned her, saying powerful men rarely offered kindness without hidden motives. Yet, deep down, she felt conflicted. Part of her was frightened, while another part wondered why a man like him would notice someone so ordinary. It was the beginning of an invisible bond, one that would draw her deeper into his world, where admiration could easily turn into obsession. A few weeks later, Maria received a phone call from the Sheikh's personal assistant. He informed her that Sheikh Khalid had requested a private medical consultation at his villa, claiming he was experiencing discomfort related to his recent procedure. The tone of the message was polite but firm. There was no option to decline. Maria hesitated, feeling uneasy about visiting him outside of hospital supervision, yet professionalism and duty guided her decision. She prepared her medical kit and traveled to his estate that evening, unaware that this visit would change everything. When she arrived, the villa looked even more imposing at night, lit with golden lamps that reflected on the marble pathway. Inside, servants led her through grand hallways filled with expensive art and silent opulence. Sheikh Khalid waited for her in a private sitting room rather than his bedroom. He looked perfectly healthy, dressed in traditional white robes, his expression calm but unreadable. Maria quickly realized he hadn't called for a medical reason. He asked her to sit, and though she tried to keep the encounter professional, his tone shifted from formal to personal. He told her he admired her strength and humility, qualities he rarely found among those in his social circle. He spoke of how he felt drawn to her calmness, how she reminded him of peace he couldn't buy. Maria listened in silence, unsure how to respond. The air grew heavy with tension. When she stood to leave, he asked her to visit him again, not as a nurse, but as a guest. She declined politely, but his voice carried quiet insistence. That night, as she rode back to her apartment, Maria felt her hands trembling. Something had begun that she could no longer control, and part of her knew there was no turning back. After that night, Maria tried to avoid any further involvement with Sheikh Khalid. She focused on her work, volunteering for night shifts and extra duties to stay busy. But the Sheikh was not a man easily ignored. Flowers continued to arrive, then small boxes with jewelry she never opened, and invitations written in elegant Arabic script. Each one she refused, returning them through the hospital courier. Still, his interest didn't fade. Weeks later, he appeared again at the hospital under the pretense of a routine checkup. His sudden visit caused a stir among the staff, but his eyes searched only for her. When he saw her in the corridor, his calm smile returned, and once again, she felt the quiet pressure of his presence. Eventually, her resistance began to weaken. He was persuasive in a way that didn't rely on words. There were moments when his charm seemed genuine, and she couldn't deny that a strange comfort grew between them. Late one evening, she agreed to have tea at his villa, convincing herself it was harmless. That single visit led to many more. Over time, their meetings became secret and frequent, hidden from the world. Maria told herself it wasn't love, but the loneliness of living far from home made her crave connection. The Sheikh treated her with affection, yet always with control. He spoke of keeping their relationship private to protect her and his reputation. Maria wanted to believe his intentions were sincere, but deep down, unease lingered. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, one that could cost her everything if discovered. Still, she continued, trapped between fear and fascination, unaware that the luxury surrounding her would soon turn into the bars of an invisible cage. 2 months passed in quiet secrecy. Maria's visits to the Sheikh's villa became part of a hidden routine. She was careful, always arriving in plain clothes, never using her real name on guest lists. Yet the longer the affair continued, the more she felt something changing within her, emotionally and physically. She began feeling unusually tired, her appetite faded, and mornings became difficult. At first, she dismissed it as stress, but when her symptoms persisted, she decided to buy a pregnancy test during one of her rare trips to the city. Back in her small apartment, Maria waited until her roommates had left for work. Her hands shook as she followed the instructions. When the result appeared, her breath caught. The test showed 2 clear lines. For several minutes, she sat frozen, unable to believe what she was seeing. She whispered a prayer under her breath, hoping it was a mistake. But when she tried again with another test, the result was the same. She was pregnant. Panic spread through her like fire. In Dubai, unmarried women who became pregnant faced severe punishment, even imprisonment. She knew the law and the danger that came with it. The father of her child was one of the most powerful men in the city, yet that gave her no protection. If anything, it made her situation worse. Her career, her safety, even her freedom were suddenly at risk. For nights, she couldn't sleep, torn between fear and despair. Finally, unable to bear the secret alone, she decided to tell Sheikh Khalid the truth. She believed he would help her. She believed his promises of care and protection meant something. But what awaited her was not comfort. It was a cold and ruthless storm that would destroy her world. When Maria finally gathered the courage to tell Sheikh Khalid about her pregnancy, she rehearsed every word in her mind. She imagined him being shocked, perhaps angry at first, but then understanding. She thought he might find a way to protect her, to keep their secret safe. That illusion shattered the moment she spoke the truth. His expression hardened instantly. The warmth and affection that once softened his eyes vanished. The sheikh stood silently for a few seconds before turning away, his voice cold and sharp. To him, the pregnancy was not a sign of love, it was a threat. He paced the room in anger, accusing her of carelessness, of jeopardizing his name and his family's honor. Maria tried to speak, but he silenced her with a raised hand. His words were cruel, each one cutting deeper than the last. He spoke not as a man who once cared for her, but as someone defending his empire. He reminded her that their affair was meant to remain hidden forever, something that could never exist publicly. A child would destroy everything he had built, and in his world, reputation was worth more than truth. Maria's tears fell uncontrollably as he ordered her to stay silent. He warned her that if anyone discovered the truth, she would be the one punished, not him. Fear consumed her. She realized she was utterly powerless against his influence. The man she once trusted now looked at her like a problem to be erased. When she left the villa that night, her heart was heavy with dread. The love she thought she had found had turned into something terrifying, and she knew that from that moment on, she was no longer safe. In the days that followed, Sheikh Khalid's behavior grew colder and more distant. He stopped taking Maria's calls and sent messages only through his assistant. Every word carried the same warning: stay quiet, avoid attention, and keep working as if nothing had happened. Maria lived in constant fear, struggling to hide her pregnancy beneath loose uniforms. Her body changed, and so did her sense of safety. The hospital soon noticed her weight gain, and whispers began to spread among her colleagues. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone asked questions she couldn't answer. Meanwhile, the sheikh's mind was consumed by panic. He feared that rumors would reach the media or, worse, his family. A scandal involving a foreign nurse carrying his child could ruin his reputation. After several sleepless nights, he decided on a plan. A cruel, calculated way to erase the problem without dirtying his hands. Maria would marry another man, someone willing to take responsibility for the unborn child in exchange for money and favors. It was, in his view, the perfect solution. He chose Jamal, a hospital worker from a poor background who cleaned surgical instruments and often begged for extra shifts. Jamal was promised a large payment, a visa sponsorship, and a future job abroad if he agreed to marry Maria. When he hesitated, the sheikh's men made it clear there was no choice. Papers were prepared swiftly, and Maria was given an ultimatum. She could either marry Jamal quietly or face consequences that could destroy her life and career. Terrified, cornered, and alone, Maria realized she had no escape. The powerful man she once trusted had turned her life into a transaction, and she was left to pay the price for loving him. The day of the marriage arrived without celebration or joy. Maria was taken from her apartment early in the morning by two men she had never seen before. They told her she was being escorted to a private location for documentation purposes. Her hands trembled as she sat in the back seat of a black car, the city flashing by in silence. When the car stopped, she found herself in a small room inside a government building, where a cleric and two witnesses waited. Jamal stood there too, dressed formally but visibly nervous. He avoided her eyes, clutching the papers the sheikh's men had given him. The ceremony was brief and mechanical. Maria barely heard the words being spoken. Everything felt distant and unreal. Her mind screamed for her to run, but she knew escape was impossible. Within minutes, signatures were placed and photographs were taken to make the union appear legitimate. The Sheikh's assistant handed Jamal an envelope filled with cash and a stern warning to play his role as husband convincingly. Maria was told she would live with Jamal until further notice. That night, she was taken to a modest apartment far from her workplace. There were no guests, no congratulations, only silence and fear. Jamal spoke little, making it clear he had agreed to the arrangement for survival, not love. Maria cried herself to sleep, realizing her freedom had vanished completely. After the forced marriage, Maria's life became a quiet prison. The Sheikh's men visited often, pretending to check on her welfare, but really ensuring she followed orders. They reminded her that one wrong move, one word to anyone, could end her career or worse. She lived with Jamal in a small apartment on the city's outskirts, a place chosen deliberately for its isolation. Jamal rarely spoke to her except when necessary. His role was to be a husband in name only, but his fear of the Sheikh made him cruel in his silence. Maria was allowed to continue working, though under close supervision. Her hospital colleagues noticed how she had changed, once cheerful and warm, now withdrawn and pale. She avoided questions, forced smiles, and kept her distance from everyone. Every evening when she returned home, one of the Sheikh's drivers would follow her car, a quiet reminder that she was never truly free. Even her phone calls were monitored. Sometimes she would pick up the receiver and hear faint clicks on the line, proof that someone was listening. Weeks passed like this, filled with suffocating tension. One night, Maria received an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single note in Arabic. "Silence keeps you safe." Her hands shook as she read it. The message confirmed what she already knew. The Sheikh's reach extended everywhere. She could not trust anyone, not even the man she lived with. Sleep became impossible, and every noise outside made her flinch. Her once bright hopes of working in Dubai had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The power that had once flattered her now trapped her, and each passing day felt like another step deeper into a life that no longer belonged to her. As the months passed, Maria's pregnancy could no longer be hidden. Her uniform grew tighter and her movements slower. She requested lighter duties, claiming fatigue, but her supervisors began whispering behind her back. Questions surfaced about her sudden marriage, about the timing, about the man no one had ever seen visit her. Each day at work felt like walking through a storm of unspoken judgment. She kept her head down, speaking to no one, aware that even a single mistake could expose everything. At home, the atmosphere was no better. Jamal remained distant, his guilt showing in the way he avoided her eyes. He was terrified of crossing the Sheikh's boundaries. He slept on the couch, leaving Maria alone in the bedroom, as though afraid that even being near her might bring him trouble. When he did speak, his tone was cold and cautious. "Do what you're told," he would mutter, as if reminding himself as much as her. Maria spent long hours alone, consumed by fear and loneliness. She began writing in secret, tiny notes she hid inside her Bible, describing everything that had happened, how she met the Sheikh, how she was forced to marry, and how she lived under constant watch. Writing became her only release, a fragile connection to truth in a life built on lies. Sometimes she would sit by the window at night, feeling her baby move and wondering what kind of world awaited him. She prayed silently for strength and for a miracle, though she had stopped believing miracles could happen. Each day felt heavier than the last, and deep inside, she sensed that the walls closing around her were preparing for something far darker than she could yet imagine. One afternoon, while Maria was resting after a long hospital shift, a soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found a woman standing there, a Filipino social worker from the community office. She explained she was conducting a wellness check for migrant workers who had missed recent appointments. Maria froze, unsure if it was a trick. The woman's kind eyes and familiar accent offered a rare sense of safety, but fear still gripped her. She invited her in cautiously, hiding her anxiety behind polite smiles. The social worker asked a few casual questions about her job, health, and home life. Maria answered carefully, choosing every word with precision. She could feel the Sheikh's invisible presence even there, listening through the walls. The woman noticed Maria's nervousness and the dark circles under her eyes, but didn't press. When she mentioned community support for expectant mothers, Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to cry, to tell everything, but the warning echo of "silence keeps you safe" held her back. Before leaving, the woman handed her a small card with a phone number for emergencies. As Maria took it, she made a desperate decision. When the social worker placed her bag on the table, Maria quickly slipped one of her handwritten notes between the papers inside. It was her only chance, her silent plea for help. After the woman left, Maria collapsed onto the floor, trembling. She had no idea if the note would ever be found or if it would even reach someone who could help her. But for the first time in months, she felt a faint glimmer of hope. Tiny, fragile, but alive. Somewhere, beyond the walls that trapped her, her story might finally be heard. The following days passed in unbearable tension. Maria sensed something had changed. The Sheikh's men began visiting more frequently, their tone sharper, their questions more invasive. They asked if anyone had come to see her recently, if she had spoken to anyone new. Maria lied, saying no, forcing herself to stay calm even as her heart pounded. But she knew deep down that they were suspicious. She wondered if the social worker had discovered her note, or worse, if the Sheikh already knew about it. Late one night, Maria was awakened by the sound of a car pulling up outside the building. Moments later, there was a loud knock on the door. Jamal opened it to find two of the Sheikh's guards standing there, dressed in black, their expressions grim. They told him something in Arabic, and his face turned pale. He looked at Maria with fear before whispering that they were ordered to move her immediately. She wasn't allowed to pack anything except her identification and medical documents. Maria's protests were ignored. Within minutes, she was escorted to a waiting car. The city lights blurred as they drove through the night, leaving behind every trace of her old life. No one told her where they were going, and her repeated questions were met with silence. Hours later, the car stopped at a remote location surrounded by desert. A large villa stood in isolation, guarded and lifeless. The guards instructed her to stay inside and not attempt contact with anyone. Then they left her alone in a cold, silent room. Maria realized the truth. Her secret had been discovered. The Sheikh's fear of exposure had turned her into a prisoner. The note she had risked everything to send had set events in motion she could no longer control. Maria's new home in the desert was nothing like the city apartment she had left behind. From the outside, the villa looked grand, its walls painted a soft cream that glowed beneath the sun. But inside, it was eerily silent, stripped of warmth or comfort. The windows were covered with thick curtains, the doors heavy and locked from the outside. A single maid brought her food twice a day, avoiding conversation, her eyes filled with fear. Two guards patrolled the corridors, their footsteps echoing at night like a constant reminder that she was being watched. The isolation began to wear her down. Days blended into nights, marked only by the sound of the desert wind. There was no television, no phone, and no contact with the outside world. Sometimes she would stand at the window, staring at the endless sand dunes, dreaming of escape. But even if she ran, she knew there was nowhere to go. The nearest town was miles away, and the Sheikh's reach extended far beyond those dunes. Her pregnancy advanced quietly under this forced confinement. The only doctor who visited her was chosen by the Sheikh, a stern woman who never spoke unless necessary. Maria felt like a ghost, trapped in a place where time had stopped. Every night, she prayed for strength, whispering to the child growing inside her that they would survive this together. One evening, she overheard the guards talking outside her door. Though their words were low, one phrase chilled her. "When the baby comes, she won't stay." The meaning was clear. Maria wasn't just imprisoned, she was being prepared for something far worse. Her heart pounded as realization sank in. They planned to take her child away the moment it was born. When the time finally came, Maria's contractions began in the dead of night. There was no one to comfort her, no family, no friend to hold her hand. The guards quickly summoned the doctor, who arrived with two nurses and a small medical kit. The labor was long and exhausting. Sweat drenched her face, and pain consumed her body. She screamed for mercy, but the walls of the villa swallowed her cries. Hours passed before the baby's first cry echoed through the cold, empty room. It was a boy. For a moment, time stood still as she saw his tiny face. Despite everything, love flooded her heart. She whispered a prayer of thanks, holding him close, his fragile body warming her trembling arms. But her relief didn't last. The doctor quickly took the baby, wrapping him in a white blanket. Maria tried to protest, begging to hold him longer, but one of the guards gently pushed her back onto the bed. The doctor assured her the baby was fine, that he would be cared for and registered properly. The tone was rehearsed, emotionless. Within minutes, the baby was carried out of the room, leaving Maria with nothing but silence and the faint echo of his cry. She was too weak to fight, too broken to scream. When she woke hours later, her arms were empty, her body aching, and her heart shattered. She called out for her son, but no one answered. The guards avoided her eyes, and the maid pretended not to hear. The crib placed beside her bed was gone. That night, Maria realized the full cruelty of her fate. She was alive, but her child, the only pure thing born of her pain, had been stolen away, disappearing into the Sheikh's secret world. The morning after her son's birth, Maria woke to a heavy silence. The sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Her body felt weak, her mind disoriented, but the first thing she noticed was the emptiness beside her. The small crib that had been placed near her bed was gone. Panic surged through her chest as she struggled to sit up, calling out for her baby. Her voice cracked with desperation, echoing through the vast emptiness of the villa. No one answered. When the maid finally entered, Maria demanded to know where her baby was. The woman kept her eyes down and whispered, "He's been taken to a safe place." Those words pierced Maria's heart like a knife. She tried to rise, but her weakened body gave way. She crawled toward the door, shouting, pleading for someone to bring her child back. The guards blocked her path, their faces blank, unmoved by her grief. She collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching the empty blanket left behind. Days passed in torment. No one spoke of the baby again. The doctor returned once to check on her health, but ignored her questions. Each time she tried to ask, she was silenced. Her food was brought to her room, her movements restricted. The isolation deepened into despair. Maria stopped eating, her body wasting away under the weight of her grief. Nights were the worst. She could still hear her baby's faint cries in her mind, haunting her every breath. She prayed endlessly, not for freedom anymore, but for her son's safety. In the stillness of the desert, she made herself a promise. If she ever escaped this place, she would find her child, no matter how far she had to go or what it would cost her. Several weeks later, far away from the desert villa, the Filipino social worker who had visited Maria's apartment sat at her desk sorting through case files. While reviewing her notes, a folded piece of paper slipped from her folder and fell onto the floor. Curious, she unfolded it and saw Maria's neat handwriting covering the page. As she read the words, her hands began to tremble. The note described everything: the affair with the sheik, the forced marriage, the threats, and the fear that consumed her every day. It was a desperate plea for help. The social worker immediately realized the danger Maria was in. She reported the message to her supervisor, who contacted the embassy and several human rights organizations. Within days, quiet inquiries began. Officials started checking hospital records, cross-referencing Maria's employment file and residential address. What they found was alarming. Her sudden resignation, lack of contact, and the absence of any travel record raised suspicion. The embassy escalated the case, labeling it as a possible human trafficking and unlawful detention incident. Behind closed doors, a team of investigators began tracing connections that led to Sheikh Khalid's name. However, they had to move carefully. The Sheikh's influence was powerful, and any direct accusation could lead to immediate retaliation or cover-up. Evidence had to be collected discreetly. Meanwhile, journalists began to catch wind of the story through unofficial whispers within the migrant community. The tale of a Filipina nurse vanishing after a scandal with a powerful man started circulating quietly online. Pressure began to mount. For the first time, cracks appeared in the Sheikh's carefully built image of control and respectability. The secret he had buried in the desert was slowly starting to surface, and the world was beginning to take notice. The Sheikh first learned about the investigation through one of his close advisors. At first, he dismissed it, confident that his connections could silence any noise before it reached the public. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder. The embassy's quiet inquiries were starting to unsettle people around him. and even some of his trusted staff began showing signs of nervousness. Reports reached him that journalists were asking questions about a missing Filipina nurse once employed at a private villa on the outskirts of Dubai. The Sheikh's calm exterior began to crack. He ordered immediate action. The villa where Maria had been kept was cleared out overnight. Documents, photographs, and even her personal belongings were destroyed. The few servants who had seen too much were paid off and sent back to their countries, warned never to speak of what they knew. The guards were relocated to different posts, and new names appeared on official records. To anyone who looked, it would seem as though Maria had never existed. But despite his efforts, one detail slipped through: the doctor who had delivered Maria's baby. Unbeknownst to the Sheikh, the doctor had secretly kept a copy of the birth record, unsure of what to do but unwilling to destroy it. Fear kept him silent, yet guilt weighed heavily on him. When investigators approached him weeks later, he hesitated but didn't turn them away. For the first time, the Sheikh's empire of secrecy began to falter. The walls he had built around his crimes were beginning to crumble, one small truth at a time. He could feel his grip on control slipping, and paranoia started to consume him. The one thing he feared most, that the world would discover his darkest sin, was finally becoming real. The doctor's conscience could no longer bear the weight of silence. Late one evening, he slipped into his office, locking the door behind him. From a hidden drawer, he retrieved a small envelope containing a single document: the birth certificate of Maria's child. It bore her full name and the date, along with a hastily signed authorization from the Sheikh himself. The doctor scanned it, encrypting the digital copy, and sent it anonymously to the embassy's investigation team. Minutes after pressing send, fear overtook him. He deleted every trace from his computer, but deep down he knew it was too late to undo what he had done. Within days, the evidence reached the hands of international investigators. The document confirmed that Maria had indeed given birth inside a private residence under suspicious circumstances. Combined with witness testimonies and her earlier letter, the case took on new urgency. The embassy began pressuring local authorities to locate her and ensure her safety. Quietly but firmly, an order was issued to question the Sheikh. News of this reached him before the officials arrived. Enraged, he smashed the glass table in his office, shouting at his aides to make this disappear. His power had always protected him, but now, for the first time, it seemed fragile. He ordered Maria to be moved again, this time to a remote property deep in the desert. The guards were instructed to keep her isolated, away from all contact. But the Sheikh's desperation only made the situation worse. His frantic attempts to hide the truth left a trail of inconsistencies. People began to notice, and those once loyal to him started doubting his judgment. The empire built on fear and control was beginning to collapse from within, piece by piece. The day the authorities arrived at the Sheikh's residence, the air was thick with tension. Black cars lined the long driveway, their tinted windows reflecting the desert sun. For years, his wealth and influence had shielded him from scrutiny, but this time, the world was watching. Cameras waited outside the gates, journalists whispered into microphones, and embassy representatives stood ready with documents in hand. The Sheikh, once untouchable, now faced questions he could no longer evade. His confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by a cold, silent fury as officials entered his home. Meanwhile, miles away in the desert compound, Maria was barely conscious. Her health had deteriorated from weeks of isolation and malnutrition. When the guards received sudden orders to abandon the property, they fled in panic, leaving her behind. Hours later, investigators tracing the Sheikh's secret estates discovered the location. They broke into the small room where she was kept and found her weak but alive. The moment she was carried out into the daylight, tears streamed down her face. She was free at last. The investigation soon confirmed everything: the threats, the confinement, the birth of her child. International outrage followed. The Sheikh's assets were frozen, his travel banned, and his case handed to higher authorities. Under immense pressure, he was forced into custody while further evidence was collected. Months later, Maria stood before a panel at the embassy. She was frail, but her voice was steady. She vowed to continue searching for her child, who had been taken from her arms. Though justice was not complete, her story had exposed a hidden world of power and abuse. For the first time, The silence that had once buried her was finally broken.